All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to another episode of our community podcast. We got some very exciting updates today. We had a new devlog come out, so Tayl's going to go over some details from that. And can't wait to get into it. Tail, what do you got for us today?
Today I'm going to talk a little bit about which engine we chose, why we chose those. I want to talk a little bit about the movement of our characters, why we made the decisions that we did and how we made those decisions. And I want to talk a little bit about the perspective.
Very cool. Yeah, you were telling me some things about the perspective, like when I was first getting onto the project, how it opened up so many new possibilities for how accessible the game could be, how much you could push the story, how much you could focus on those things, because you weren't so limited by making a game that was so hyper realistic and focusing on that aspect of it to where it wasn't easily playable or you had to skimp on story elements. You could really get into the lore and the actual gameplay.
So we ended up choosing an isometric perspective for our RPG game. When designing a tactical RPG, it's very crucial to provide players with a clear and comprehensive view of the battlefield, that they can make well-informed decisions and execute their strategies very effectively. With this in mind, we decided to choose an isometric perspective. That perspective offers several advantages for a game like ours. It allows players to have a sort of bird's eye view of the entire game area. That makes it a lot easier for them to assess the terrain and assess the positioning of their characters and potential threats and finding items along the way. This comprehensive overview is essential as it enables players to plan their moves very securely and anticipate the consequences of all their actions, because they can also look a little bit further away than you would, for example, with a top-down game. And that's another benefit of an isometric perspective, is that it adds a sense of depth and dimension to the game. And apart from the fact that you see more, it also creates a more immersive and visually appealing environment. That's very important in capturing the attention of the imagination of our players. The perspective brings a unique visual appeal to the game, and that helps to create that immersive experience for players. And so there's a couple of advantages that come with that viewpoint. Namely, like I talked about this before, the depth and dimension. Isometric projection displays the game world in a diagonal angle. It reveals three sides of the objects and characters, which is like two side sides and a top side. And this perspective creates some sort of pseudo 3D effect, and that makes the environment appear more three-dimensional and visually interesting compared to a simple top-down or side-scrolling view. There's also enhanced visibility. Like I said, the isometric perspective allows players to see a lot more of the game world at once, including items behind and around objects. So, for example, if you would have a side-scroller, you would not really be able to see anything that's behind an object. And with a isometric view, a little bit of a bird's eye view, you can see all around the item. This increases the visibility and it makes it easier to assess the terrain and characters' positions. And that also improves the strategic planning and thus the overall gameplay experience. Also for artists, like the isometric viewpoint lends itself really well to creating beautiful and detailed environments. And the unique perspective can highlight intricate design elements such as specific architecture, vegetation, and character models, drawing the player really into the game world and making it feel a lot more alive. It creates a lot better spatial awareness. An isometric perspective view, because you can see all around an object and because you can see a lot further away, it can help players better understand the spatial relationship between the characters and the objects and the terrain in the game world. And this enhanced spatial awareness is very crucial in a tactical RPG, where the positioning of specific units is like really important to and vital to its success.
Very cool. I've seen some of the like shots of the game, and it looks beautiful, honestly, like in the like creatures that are being created. It's just like the environment. I can definitely see why you went with that, just because of the feel that you said with how that lends to just such artistic, aesthetic choices. It's really cool. I can't wait to see how the finished product looks.
Yeah, definitely. Like the ability to create a 3D-like world gives artists a lot more freedom and a lot more creativity to go around. Because with a top-down view or a side view, they're very limited in what they're able to show and how they're able to show it.
I can imagine that would be really limiting. Like some of the games that I've seen, that it just seems like the way that you are able to kind of fake that perspective is really cool. And I'm sure that from a game mechanic perspective, that leads to a lot of really interesting ways that you can kind of interact with that space.
Exactly. And the fun thing is, because it's all asset-based and all tile-based, we can also create different layers. I can have the ground layer where I would put, for example, a sea level layer. We just put sea, and then I could put ground on top of that. But that way you can also have, for example, some sort of mountain where if you're on top of that mountain, a shader kind of creates extra depth on the layers below. So it feels like you're actually way higher than you are. And that way you can create way more depth in the game world.
That's awesome.
The game engine is what gives us the ability to actually do this. And throughout my gaming development journey, I've had the chance to experiment with various engines and frameworks, such as Construct, PixieJS, Phaser. I've worked with Unity, and I've worked with Unreal and with Godot. And even though each of them had its own strengths and weaknesses, we ultimately went with Godot for Spire. And it actually has a couple of big reasons. One of the main reasons behind this was the outstanding 2D support and documentation that Godot 3 provided. While Unity also has an amazing 2D support and amazing 2D documentation, engines like Unity and Unreal really focus on reality. They really focus on, we want to create the best game engine for a AAA project. So everything has to look as good as possible and as nice as possible. And even though the documentation for 2D support is really well, you notice that the documentation is really focusing on that 3D part. And that's where Godot really stood out. And during its development and during our development, it was very evident that the Godot team had a very strong focus on that 2D game development. And that was exactly what we were looking for. A couple weeks back, Godot 4 officially came out. Even though they, just like Unity and Unreal, they focused a lot on 3D as well, it continued to impress us with the 2D capabilities that they entered. Even though it was more 3D focused than 2D focused again, there were so many new additions that we could use. One of the notable improvements that they added was the inclusion of A-star support for grid movement. So A-star is a pathfinding algorithm, and it's a very powerful and efficient way of finding the shortest path between 2 points on the grid. This is something that's being widely adopted in the game development. It's not something that just we use, but most of the games that you're playing, most of them use A-star for its pathfinding. And this is particularly useful for a game like Spire that involved that grid-based movement and navigation. Downside that we had with Godot 3 that is now fixed with Godot 4 is it already had A-star, but it always focused on the corners and the side of a grid. So if your character moved somewhere, you had to calculate the distance between the corners to calculate the middle of your tile. So your character could end up in the middle. But now, thanks to its support in the actual grid with the A-star, we can just use that's already built in Godot. And something that's built in a engine always works better than writing it yourself. Pathfinding efficiency went a lot better thanks to this. So A-star is well known for its ability to find these optimal paths quickly, and it's very essential for maintaining the smooth gameplay. But by utilizing A-star, it's not just our characters that move a lot better. It also gives an enhanced AI capability, because it enables us to develop more sophisticated AI for both possible friendly and enemy units. And that also created a lot more dynamic and challenging encounters, as the AI can make smarter decisions about positioning, about flanking, pursuing targets, and thus creating a lot more engagement for the actual players. Another thing that these A-star and Godot 4 really helped us with is it makes handling obstacles a lot better. Because what we can do now, even mid-game, if a character is moving somewhere and in between something comes in his path, the A-star can efficiently navigate around these obstacles. So whether it's walls or impassable terrain or just an item that's on the ground where you can't walk over, it navigates and it calculates this mid-game during the game. And this ensures that the characters can find the best route to the destination while taking the game's environment into account.
Yeah, I can imagine that seems like it would be a big help to getting everything to run efficiently and not having to, like you said, try to code everything yourself. So that seems like that would have been a nightmare to make everything function.
Yeah, and even though we didn't know they were going to add in the grid support into A-star, I'm really happy that they did. And effectively, when you know multiple engines, the engine is just the tool to create your actual game. Effectively, you can create any game in any engine that you want. It just makes it either easier or harder for you. And for some engines, if you're comfortable using two engines, it might as well just be a coin flip which one you're going to use. At the very beginning, we kind of had this coin flip with Unity and Godot. Even though we did prefer Godot a lot more, we effectively started out using Unity before switching to Godot. With this update in Godot 4, I'm really happy that we did.
Nice. Sounds like that was a good choice.
Because we've been talking about the movement. This is something that we really worked on, what kind of characters to use, what kind of animation to use, what kind of enemies to use. And we ended up choosing for the fact that we have no animations in our characters. Seeing as I myself am a huge fan of Dungeons and Dragons, I'll share you the thought process behind the movement system in Spire and how we aim to capture the essence of basically recreating a tabletop gaming experience. When designing the movement system for our characters, we kind of wanted to pay an homage to the classic tabletop games like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. To achieve this, we created static tokens for our characters that resemble 3D printed miniatures that you also have in Warhammer 40k, for example. This visual choice helps evoke the tactile and nostalgic feeling of traditional tabletop gaming. And with this aesthetic established, we focused on designing a movement system that would really complement this tabletop experience. And we ultimately decided to go with, I would call it a chess-like movement system. It's where each character can perform specific actions within designated areas on the grid-based battlefield. And this is also where that A-star function really comes in hand. This approach not only reinforces the tabletop vibe, but it also allows for a lot more strategic gameplay, as players must carefully consider the positioning and abilities of their characters to gain a specific advantage over their opponents. By implementing a chess-like movement system and using static 3D printed tokens like we did, we have successfully created a tabletop-inspired atmosphere in Spire. This unique choice not only enhances the strategic depth, but it also gives the ability for the characters to maybe even eventually print out their characters. And this is where I also want to share a vision that we as Spire have, and we haven't really talked about this before in either devlogs or on Discord. In the future, we want to turn Spire into a physical board game. So we kind of want to leverage the assets from our digital game and make this into a reality. Because creating a physical board game adaptation of Spire has always been one of our goals. We want to not just create a game, we want to create a game, a novel, a board game, and everything is connected to each other. Everything follows the story, everything looks the same. So we really create a brand. And it doesn't matter what your preferences are, and it doesn't matter what you play, what you watch, what you read. We want to be able to get that story out to you, whether it's by tabletop, whether it's by a game, whether it's by a novel. And we believe that the tactical gameplay, the character progression, and the immersive world of Spire are a perfect fit for the tabletop gaming scene. To ensure a seamless transition from digital to physical, we have designed these game assets with both formats in mind. So, for example, our character tokens, like in the digital version of Spire, we have used these tokens for our characters, and these tokens can be easily translated into physical pieces. So that means that whether you're playing the digital game or the board game, it maintains the same aesthetic and it provides consistent experience for players who enjoy both formats. This is also why we chose the grid-based isometric design, because this game world lends itself very well to a physical board game as well. The modular nation of the grid allows us to create these interchangeable terrain tiles, or maybe even game mats that players can use to even build their own battlefields for unique and varied gameplay. And there's a lot more that we can add. Specific skills that are in the digital game. We could introduce card-based actions and abilities in the physical game. We can translate these actions and abilities into a deck of cards. Players can draw and play these cards to control their characters, provide a tactile and engaging experience that is really true to the tabletop tradition, but also translates really well to our digital edition. Because we have such an amazing lore and because we have such thought out reasons why we do something, we can create a really extensive rulebook. The rich narrative and extensive lore of Spire can be compiled into a rulebook, and it can accompany a storybook for the physical board game. This will not only provide the players with the necessary gameplay instructions, but also, again, immerse them in the captivating world of Spire through detailed descriptions and illustrations. And you'll kind of hear me say the word immerse a lot, but that's what we as Spire really want to create. We want to bring you into our world, and we want to show you everything that the world has to offer. And whether you're reading, whether you're playing, we want to be as detailed as possible with that. We're going to launch the board game after the digital game. That's one thing that's for certain. And since the digital game shares the same core mechanics as the board game, we can use the same data and feedback collected from the digital version to fine-tune the balance and design of the physical version. And this will ensure a really polished and enjoyable experience for players of the board game from day one.
It's going to be really cool to see the expansion of the worlds from digital to physical. That's going to be really exciting.
These different ways of storytelling is something that we already thought about when we just started creating Spire. So everything is also created with the idea of being able to translate everything into no matter what format you're using.
I think that works great too, because like you were saying, you guys wanted to add more to lore and expand on that, and with the tabletop genre, people are always looking for, more books and expansions and things like that. So I think that would mesh super well. That's really smart.
Yeah, exactly. And last week we already talked a little bit about sharing our assets and sharing our ideas, sharing our story. And I know that the players in the tabletop area are really creative people, and they really love to create on top of existing creations. And us giving them the ability to do so with all the assets and with all the story that we're giving out, we're basically handing them a Lego set to play with.
Yeah. That's amazing. And not even just like physically when you release the board game, because you also have the dungeon maker. So like people could even make dungeons and stuff in the dungeon maker and have that as a whole aspect of it, and have like quests built out there, which is incredible. So yeah, just it's endless possibilities for people who are into anything fantasy, tabletop RPG. It just seems like there's going to be so much there for people to dig into once it's released.
Exactly, and we're trying to create that dungeon creator in that way, that actually realizing the game board for the board game. We would love to, well, not even love to, we will use our own dungeon creator to create these tabletop scenes and create these tabletop quests. And that means that if we can do it that way, then other people can do it that way as well. And we want to show that to everyone, and we want to give people the ability to play their quest that they made themselves, for example, both physically as digitally in the game.
That's going to be awesome. I can see a lot of people getting really excited about that and being able to create some really interesting and deep community-made expansions based off of the toolbox that you're giving them.
Something that we've already talked about more often is that when you're creating a game, you have to create one thing really well and then branch out. And while we have a lot of ideas, and while we want to add in a lot of possibilities to play, we are really working on making that dungeon creator and making that game mechanic of the tactical RPG really well. And if you have those two things and combine them, then the possibilities that you can do are basically endless. Like, you're not limited to one game mode. If the systems are really built in really well, you can reuse those same systems to create completely different game modes. And there's one game that has shown this really well, and that's like war games, but mostly like StarCraft and Warcraft. I don't know if you ever played Warcraft 3.
No, I've played StarCraft though.
Yeah, they basically had the same idea. I was more of a Warcraft 3 player myself. What they did is they created their system in such a way that you had the ability to mod it in-game, basically. And you could create different game modes with the creative mode. And people went so creative that, for example, the game Dota is a game that is made in Warcraft 3. It's originally a Warcraft 3 mod. So games like League of Legends, they all derive from a mod in Warcraft 3. And that's not because Warcraft 3 was such a good MOBA game, because it wasn't a MOBA game as well, at all. But it was because Warcraft 3 had their systems right. They really focused on the mechanics. They really focused on the systems. And if you can do that right, and you can create your own game with the systems that you've built, then that also means that you can create various of other games with those same systems. And we're kind of going in the same direction. Like, we want the the grid-based movement, we want the attacks, we want the dungeon creator, and all these systems, if they are really well built and they are really connected, effectively doesn't even matter anymore whether you're making a real-time strategy game or a tactical RPG game, because as long as it's in the same vibe and it's in the same style, you can create any genre that you want. And that is what gives us the ability to add more genres in one specific game. What we're trying to create right here and right now, and the reason that we already launched the Twitter, the reason that we're already announcing a lot of things without having a big community behind it, is because there's a lot of projects out there who do a lot of engagement farming, and there's a lot of projects out there who get a huge community and they're just waiting. The only thing they do is waiting. And by the time that they are done waiting and they left, then you actually finally have something to show for. But you have nobody to show it to. And if we end up creating a rich story and we end up creating a rich Twitter and a rich asset count, and then reach out to people, then they will actually feel heard, and they will actually have something to read, they will have something to see, and they will see the process that we've done before already. So they won't come in the Discord and think, now what? They'll come in the Discord, read back, they'll see our previous tweets, they'll see our previous devlogs, maybe they'll even watch them, and then they'll see, oh, they've made a lot of progress already. I'm going to follow this more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're laying a really good foundation. I think that's a good long-term strategy. Yeah, I think every time I talk to you, it just seems like I'm more and more confident in the how much you've thought it out compared to any of the other founders that I've talked to that have been. I'm not trying to talk shit about people, but it's people that I've talked to who are trying to start Web3 games who have failed and they've never got off the ground because of these things that you've talked about, with just over-promising, putting the NFT first, putting tokens first, just putting the NFT side as such a main focus instead of actually trying to build a game first. It gives me more confidence that you've got a good project going. Happy to be here.
I'm glad to hear this. There's also a little bit to say about a lot of those projects. Again, like what you said, not about shit talking other projects, and I'm not gonna name any, obviously. But what I notice in a lot of projects is like what you said, they sell out their NFTs and then they work because they have made a promise. They work because they need that next round of investors. They work because they have to. And with a lot of projects, there's multiple projects that I'm following that are doing it the same way as we are. We really do it out of passion. We always wanted to create a game. We always wanted to create a rich world where you can just lose yourself and forget the reality and just wanting more, wanting to create more, wanting to engage with the community. And we really have that passion to create a world like that. And the biggest reason that I haven't gone looking out for investors, and the biggest reason that I haven't gone selling NFTs already, is because I effectively want to keep that passion. I'm afraid that if I sell NFTs right now and they end up selling out and we end up gaining a real good and big community right now, all waiting for me to launch something because they bought that NFT, I'm afraid that I will lose that passion and I will start working on Spire because I have to, and I will start working on Spire because I promised them something that I don't have yet. And I'm fine working with that feeling when we already have a game out, because then I have the passion to evolve the game and I have a passion to expand on that game. but then I don't have that constant fear of, oh, we overpromised, oh, we haven't launched anything yet, oh, I have to do it right now. And like, you end up making a lot of concessions that way, and you end up burning yourself out that way. And that's exactly what's happening in a lot of Web3 projects. They're just burning out because they promise something they might not even be able to deliver.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing too, is like a lot of people are betting on these founders who most of the time haven't even started a company or a project that's what they're saying that they're going to start. They're just going, hey, I really like this idea and I'm a visionary. Give me a bunch of money to go do it. And hopefully I can do it. You know, like they don't, a lot of them don't even have a track record. You know, so it's incredible to me that people are just throwing money at, and then having such high expectations and then wondering why these people are burning out when they're just beating their head against a wall trying to make this work for months and months and months, doing something that they don't potentially even know how to do, really.
There's one project that I have met about a year ago, and they were still working for a boss. They just had a 40-hour work week, and he was playing a game. And I honestly think he just thought by himself, I can do this as well. And he started going to Fiverr. He started asking for an NFT collection. He sold it. It was like during the end of bull run, so everyone was still very hyped, and like he sold out instantly. He got a lot of money. He quit work. 4 months later, his community died out, and he basically just burned out, and his money was empty, and he had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea. And honestly, when I just started, I had a lot of fear as well. And that's not because I burned out, and that's not because I don't know how to code, but making a game on your own and just hiring artists and hiring people that you know isn't as easy as it sounds. Like, I had to be my own art director. I had to be my own, like, I had to do everything. I had to direct the entire thing. The story had to make sense. The code had to make sense. The art had to make sense. They had to make sense with each other. Like, there's a lot of things that people don't realize when they start creating a project like this. And if you have that feeling that I had, what a lot of people had when they started creating the game, if you have that feeling when you already have a promise out and people actually invested in your project, then that stress is just going to keep eating you up from the inside over and over and over again. There's a lot more that I want to say, and there's a lot more that we have finished, but those are for the coming weeks.
Very cool. Sounds good. Yeah, I know we were talking a little bit about some things that you were like, no. You changed your mind last minute. You're like, I don't want to talk about that today. We'll push that off. So yeah, well, I'm excited to get into that stuff too. So just teaser for everybody listening. Tune in again next week because we have more cool stuff that's already planned to talk about. And then there's also going to be more stuff happening next week that we can talk about, I'm sure, because there always is. So yeah, there'll be plenty of stuff next episode. Thanks for chatting with us today, Tail, and talking about the development. It sounds really cool as always. Absolutely. Well, we will see everybody again next week. We'll try to do this on Twitter Spaces, but if it runs us again, we'll figure something out and we'll move back to Discord. Maybe we'll start making this like a public Discord thing or something. We'll figure it out. But thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again next week.